I've always been interested in the Mannequins Mangrove oscillator by Whimsical Raps. It describes itself as a Formant oscillator, and what that means is there are certain peaks in its frequency response that don't necessarily correspond to what pitch you're playing on the keyboard. This is different than most oscillators, so I asked Michell of Whimsical Raps how it worked. He shared that he prototyped it on a Surge modular system, and I'd like to share with you some of the details of that patch. Gil started with a basic oscillator that could put out a steady pulse, such as a square wave. So let's go ahead and look at the square wave coming out of our Moog Mother 32. And I'm going to patch that into the trigger input on a Surge dual universal slope generator by random source. What a slope generator does is that if you put a normal input into it, it acts as a pair of slew limiters. One a positive slew for rising signals, and one a negative slew for falling signals. If instead you hit it with a trigger input, what it does is wire voltage to those inputs, cycles through the rise and fall, waits till the fall is done, and then looks for the next trigger. So we're going to go ahead and plug our square wave into the trigger input and use that to trigger our envelope here. I'm going to turn down to minimum times. On the universal slope generator, full clockwise is the shortest time, unlike a normal envelope. And normally with most slope generators, you would just take the output. Let's go ahead and look at that. You see a series of yellow spikes there, which are the rise and fall times being triggered by that square wave. Since it is sort of an envelope, it's unipolar, it's just above 0 volts. It just so happens that the Surge slope generator has a BP, or bipolar output. This makes it go positive and negative, better for a VCO. Now you might have noticed that it does invert the signal, which makes it a little bit harder to see what's going on. So just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to take that output and run it through a channel of my erogenous tones levitate just to invert it. So I'm going to bring that back into that yellow input, slowly increase the signal level until I'm reaching roughly peak to peak what the square wave is, and then I'm going to hit this invert button to go ahead and look at it, so that the yellow spike lines up with the rising edge of the square wave. Maybe give it just a little bit more level here. There we go. Finally, I'm going to patch that output to the external audio input on my Mother 32 and put it into drone mode. Right now I'm listening to the square wave out of the Mother 32. As I turn the mix over, this is the pulse coming out of the universal slope generator. Very thin sound. And if we look at its harmonic shape, there's something interesting going on. Unlike the square wave, where the entire set of harmonics move up and down the scale as I play different notes. Here's the lower C. Notice that everything slides to the left. Middle C, everything slides to the right. High C, things slide even further to the right, but otherwise keep the same shape. If I go to my pulse here, and look at this harmonic spectrum, as I play down an octave, we still have that same set of high-end harmonics. Even though we did add lower harmonics because we're playing a lower pitch, the shape of those higher harmonics stay the same. As I go to a higher C, you'll see that for the most part, we're still keeping those same high harmonics in the same shape to the harmonic spectrum. What's going on is, that yellow spike is like an impulse. It by itself is one sound event that is generating its own set of harmonics. Now, that's being repeated by the frequency of the square wave oscillator. So you're going to get some of the harmonics of that pulse and the fundamental pitch of the driving oscillator, and that's why their harmonics stay somewhat the same as I play across the keyboard. Now, if it's hard to imagine exactly what that means, let's go ahead and temporarily plug in a voltage from my keyboard controller to the 1 volt per octave input on my slope generator. Go ahead and tap. There we are. Our direct output here to the 1 volt per octave. No change on middle C because that's 0 volts. But you hear the tone change quite a bit on this lower pitch. The pulse got wider. You can hear the character change, unlike here where it keeps brightness even on this low C, even if I go down an octave. So has that set of high harmonics from that pulse. Put the tracking back in. Hear the high frequency component get added in. That's because we're changing the envelope time based on the keyboard tracking. That's what makes this patch a Formant oscillator patch. The shape of that wave stays the same regardless of what note I'm playing. Now to really see that, let's go ahead and start adding some envelope times. Let's add a little bit of a fall off. Turning this more into a sawtooth wave. When I'm playing this high C, and we'll go ahead and get this patch cable out of the way, you see it looks like a sawtooth, but when I go down to this middle C, it's just that saw kind of shark tooth pulse, and then it goes down to a flat level for the remainder of the cycle until the square wave re-triggers it. Go down to low C, same thing, same with pulse, then it rests until the square wave re-triggers. Go ahead and plug back in my 1 volt per octave keyboard tracking just to show what a normal oscillator would do. You hear it get bassier? That's because the waveform has gotten wider to go ahead and match what pitch we're playing. Compared to the Formant response for that impulse is always the same. So there's some slight tonal variations there in how it tracks the keyboard. And of course you can take your keyboard tracking, put it into your voltage control for your attack and release times, and go ahead and vary the amounts of tracking to have that timbre change across the keyboard. But right now I want to play a little bit with these wave shapes. Again, I can change the attack and the fall. Go to something more triangle-like if I want to. Or I can take advantage of making these exponential shapes to give more of a bend to the rise and fall and further change the timbre. Now, not only does this allow me to dial in the timbre I want, you can hear how lovely that would sound with a bit of modulation. Almost be like a pulse with modulation, except for you're changing the bend of the wave. And indeed, Michell said one of the best things to do with a mangrove is to very lightly frequency modulate its different parameters. So here I have an oscillator where I can really dial in the wave shape by basically triggering it with a square wave and then using a slope generator to generate that waveform. But there's some other interesting things about this circuit in this particular design. As we've noted, that yellow cycle does not change its basic impulse, regardless of what pitch I'm playing. What happens if I play such a high pitch that the square wave has a shorter cycle than our pulse does? I'm going to do a little change here to our circuitry and change it over to track our pulse so we get a better synchronization out of our circuit here. And show you what happens when I play a low note. Everything's fine. But as I start to go up the scale, we suddenly jump down an octave. So basically it acts as a sort of subharmonic generator or frequency divider as we play around with the duration of that particular pulse. Now divided by 2 gives us that octave below. But if we push it even further, we'll get a divide by 3. Here's our divide by 2. Here's our divide by 3, an octave and a fifth. Divide by 4, 2 octaves. Now this is particularly interesting when you're playing something like an arpeggio or a sequence, because as you play higher notes, this is going to jump in octaves, jump down to a subharmonic, and you're going to get sort of a counterpoint. So let's set up a real simple but somewhat wide-ranging sequence here. So we hear what's going on. Bring in the square wave. So we hear the moog. And you hear that the interval between those notes are changing. I can go ahead and go down to a shorter spike so that our oscillator and sub-oscillator are playing the same note in unison. But as I widen this out, listen to a sort of counterpoint appear. I'll go to a faster sequence. The highest notes get transposed down in pitch first. I'm going to switch the moog to more thin nasal sound to match. And let's do it again. Here's just our new waveform, playing the correct pitch. As we bring it down, you'll hear it start to play different note intervals. Let's go ahead and actually simplify this arpeggio. You hear the sequence of notes change. Changes again as we get a further division in here. So really access an interesting counterpoint to our original oscillator. So that's the idea behind a Formant oscillator, is you're basically creating a wave shape that's independent from the pitch that you're playing, so that it has its own set of harmonics as opposed to harmonics that dutifully follow your playing up and down the keyboard. Slightly different tone, something different to play around with. Now obviously when Michell created the Mangrove oscillator, he took this idea and then modified it further. He came up with his own oscillator core, he used his own wave shaping elements, the Mangrove has its own sound, and he really presents things as some interesting parameters like air and barrel and things like that. But I hope this gives you an idea of how to use other modules in your system to create wave shapes that don't necessarily match what a normal oscillator does. The wave shape can change as you can play different notes on the keyboard.